Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Alain. As you can see, we have a special guest on the show today, and I'm drinking out of It's Good to Have Friends mug because I am fortunate to have friends all over the world and all over the country, and many of them are involved in self-defense, safety, things that I'm involved in. And so I have a friend, Jason Brick, with me this morning that going to be talking about his new book on safety. And before I have Jason introduce himself a little bit for those that might not be familiar with him, I want to remind you this will be on enjoylifesafely.com. You'll be able to get the audio there, listen to share the video, whatever you want to do, and get that free ebook while you're there too. You'll also get the newsletter, a lot of good stuff on staying safe and self-defense. So get that at Enjoy Life Safely. And now, Jason, would you introduce yourself a little bit for people that might not be as familiar with you?
Sure thing. My name's Jason Brick. I've been a martial artist this November. It'll be 40 years. And I've also been a journalist and a father. And a project I started about 5 years ago was Safest Family on the Block, where I interviewed safety experts from every discipline, police, firefighters, nutritionists, psychologists, anybody I could find who had information about keeping your family safe. Folks who do know me probably know that Alain was on the show talking about school shootings. And after more than 100 episodes, I self-published this book here, Safest Family on the Block. And people seem to like it. And then YMAA Publishing came along, and we've got a revised edition of it. Safest comes out next Thursday, May 8th. And it's a collection of 101 different tips, tricks, habits to keep your family safe, from things that I learned from folks like Alain.
And that book will be available at YMAA. It'll be available on Amazon, anywhere you want to get books, correct?
Yeah, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. My personal favorite right now is called bookshop.org. It's an Amazon alternative, and one of the things is when you set up an account, you can name a local bookstore that if you order your book, bookshop.org ships it to you, but the bookstore that you've chosen gets the profit as though you had walked into that bookstore and purchased a copy.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know about that.
I didn't either until the YMAA guys told me about it, but it's all the convenience of Amazon, and you're supporting your local bookshop.
Nice. Dixon's here, and Dixon said, hi, Jason. Stateside or still abroad? Congrats on the new book release.
Hi, Dixon. Some folks know that my family spent the last year in Crete, just so that my kids could have the experience of being out of the country for a year. And yeah, we got back home just in time for my youngest to start school last September. So we're back here in Oregon.
I want to, because Dixon brought that up and you brought that up, I just got some pictures this morning from my daughter who's in Japan. She sent some really cool pictures. She's doing her semester abroad in Korea, but a friend of hers and her hopped over to Japan for the long weekend to see some sights and have some fun in Japan.
Nice.
You took your kids to Crete for the year and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on the importance, because we both share this, of exposing our kids to other countries, other cultures and so forth, and also to make sure that they can experience those things safely?
So it's one of the best things you can do for your kids. Living abroad, spending significant time abroad, more than just a week trip to London. It makes you a bigger, better, braver person. It grows your mind. It grows your heart. And, it also, to my way of thinking, very few things make you more patriotic about certain parts of America than seeing how it is elsewhere. And very few things prepare you better for doing the work to fix the places America needs a little work than seeing the ways it's done right elsewhere. And also it really helps you become a better human by spending time outside of the context that you are accustomed to, by finding out that the way that is being done in your neighborhood isn't the way. And in terms of doing it safely, there's a lot of advice about that, more than we can talk about in a 15-minute coffee break in the morning. But it is much safer, much easier to be safe than I think most of us envision when we think about going to countries, especially the countries that are a little sketchier perhaps than Japan or Korea or England or France. That's just a matter of, there's a couple of the most important resources, I think, are expat forums. For those who don't know, expat stands for expatriate, and it's people who have gone and live in a country other than the country of their birth. It usually refers to English-speaking people. And anywhere you want to go, you can find a Facebook group that's an expat community for expat community Kuala Lumpur. And then you'll be in touch with generally friendly, generally helpful people who have lived there for a while and can tell you exactly which neighborhoods are safe, which neighborhoods aren't so safe, which shops aren't going to rip you off, which cab stand has just a bunch of guys who are already, which cab stands are safer. You can get very detailed information from people who know just by looking for those expat forums. And that's just one of many, many skills you can pick up to keep your kids safe while you give them this opportunity to grow as a human.
And that's awesome advice. And that's so true. I've always said, when you're planning a trip, and that's whether it's a weekend trip, a week trip, or a year abroad or more, that yes, you plan the things that you want to see and do, but part of your planning should be the safety planning. You know, make sure the hotel you pick is a nice hotel, but a safe hotel. And that forum idea, great way to get that research to help your planning to ensure a safe, enjoyable excursion, whether it's a weekend or a year.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's so easy now. Back when I was doing a lot of my traveling, we didn't have the internet. You use Lonely Planet guidebooks. You would buy those, and then you would get to the country and you would talk to people and try to find people. And now it is so much easier because we have the internet and that global connection.
Yeah. And even back in the day with the Lonely Guidebooks, which is what we used when I went to Japan for a couple of years. And I'm sure you had the same experience where you read it and you got to that section on safety. And every single one of those books had one or two common locals. You get off the plane and you're like, oh, there it is.
Yes.
You know, and so that information is there.
It is. It's there. And, you know, it's you need to do it. I mean, because the world isn't as scary as some people make it out. You don't have to be Rambo, you know, a Navy SEAL or a Special Forces operator to travel safely. You just have to have some common sense, do a little research, enhance your awareness, and get your head out of your apps when you land on the and pay more attention.
Absolutely. And not for nothing, but the book is split into 10 sections, each on a topic of family safety. And one of the chapters is, in fact, travel safety, with 10 pieces of advice about that. Another important one of which I think is, you know, the concept of baseline. And I think a lot of your viewers too, about, you know, the best example I use is, if you walk into a bar and it's noisy, that doesn't tell you anything about safety. If you walk into a bar that's quiet, it doesn't tell you anything about safety. If you're gets noisy, that change from the baseline of quiet is one of the signs to pay close attention. Thing is that when we're traveling, when my family spent a year in Malaysia, and people kept touching and picking up my child without asking permission, which is normal behavior there. But if that happened in Houston, there would be an immediate problem. But the way you defeat the fact that you don't have baseline is you just watch the locals. If you walk into an alley or a park and there are families, turn around, go somewhere else. If you're in a bar and everybody leaves, leave with them. Just watching, staying aware of what the locals are doing and how the locals are acting is a really good way of borrowing the spidey sense that you've already developed for where you're used to hanging out.
Yeah, great advice. And again, the locals, when you get to a place, often, you know, the hotel, the people that work at the hotel and different kind of jobs like that, talk to them, ask them about questions. What's good? What's bad? I mean, they'll give you good recommendations. They can tell you where to steer clear of. And, you know, you just have to be able to go up and start that. And even with the language barriers, you can still work things out, and people will be very helpful in many places.
Most places. Another thing, especially if you're going to be there longer term, is find yourself a martial arts school and go sign up. because as you know, when you train with people, they become family. And it's a way of developing instantaneous family, instantaneous contacts and connections in the area. And these are people who live there, who will help you find, they'll help you find the places that won't cheat you. They'll help you have a problem. Because if you're there for more than a month, there will be some kind of problem. And those people will know. They'll know a mechanic. They'll know the good doctor, all those things.
Yep. Nope. Excellent advice. Jason, what are the other chapters in the book? You said you cover a chapter on traveling. What else kind of things do you cover in that book?
So the first chapter is on what I call golden rules, which are just either large overarching concepts or specific things that are so important that they needed to be mentioned first. And then we have school safety, we have accident prevention and first aid safety, internet safety, sex and dating and relationships, emergency preparation, crime prevention. And I think I just mentioned 7, and there's a total of 10. And then the 101st habit is just to practice, because, practice, drill, train, because, a skill that you don't practice, a plan that you don't practice and rehearse, those aren't skills. Those aren't plans. Those are wishes and hopes, and wishing and hoping when our kids' safety is on the line.
No, great advice, and a lot of good information in that book. So thanks for sharing that so people get an idea what's in there. Dixon said concierge staff are usually more than happy to provide as much info as you want. Yeah, often
Absolutely.
they can, but the folks at the hotel, especially if you picked a nice hotel, I always tell people it's not just cost. You want to pick a hotel that's going to be safe and a good neighborhood. And sometimes it's worth spending extra money to ensure that you're in a safer place than always going the cheapest route. I mean, budgets are important, but your safety is more important.
And your comfort. And this is also safety related. If you're traveling, especially with grade school aged kids, get a hotel with a pool. Because you can go, what I often do, I call it the 2-day travel day. You get up in the morning before it's hot, you go out and do the tourist thing. You come home for the late morning to early afternoon. Kids play in the pool while you kind of sit there on the chair. Maybe you and your partner trade off time taking a nap. And then just as loud, you go out again and do another tourist thing. But that pool is just absolutely a lifesaver for.
Yep, good advice. I know my daughter loved the hotel pools when we traveled when we were young, when she was younger too. Yep.
Yeah, so splurge for the pool. And also it's a reasonably good sign that if the hotel is schnoopy enough to have a pool, it's usually one level up. It's at least a B in terms of safety.
Great. Good advice. Thad's here. Good morning, Thad. And Thad asked a question. Do you have any thoughts on the need to be discreetly American traveling abroad? With the different turbulent times we have right now?
It's not gonna happen. You Americans stand out like sore thumbs almost everywhere. It's unless you can really convincingly pretend to be, everybody is going to know you're an American. So the trick really is to be friendly, not be the ugly American. Most places I've been, most people from other countries that I know love Americans. They just don't like the American government, which I feel whoever's in charge, whichever administration you happen to be in, applies to a whole lot of Americans as well. So avoid appearing American because you can't avoid appearing American. You can't gray man this. Just avoid being rude and avoid standing out as particularly wealthy. Avoid standing out as particularly clueless. You dress down, you leave the jewelry at home, you dress comfortably, you put your phone in your pocket, and you keep looking around. You look people in the eye if that's what's appropriate for that culture. You learn a couple of phrases, just hello, thank you, good morning, good to meet you. And that's all you really need to stay safe. Because again, we're not going to trick anybody into thinking we ain't Yanks.
And I found that too, that being polite goes so far. And I've seen Americans just acting like, you're just embarrassed to be part of the same, group.
Yeah.
One of the stories,
even just a little good morning, like you mentioned, your daughter spent some time in Japan. In Japanese, you have Ohayou gozaimasu, konnichiwa, konbanwa. It's hello, and one is good morning, one is good afternoon, and one is good evening. And if you just take the time to memorize and use the right one when you meet a new person, their faces just light up. Like, oh, wow, you took the time. And that's true in every country, every language I've ever heard, with the possible exception of Paris.
And I haven't traveled there, but I got a good buddy that, but he speaks fluent French. He goes back and forth to France a lot, we do Hapkido together. But, I got to tell this story. I was in a line at the airport, and this is way back in the 90s, before phones and internet, all that. And we still had paper tickets and so forth. And I'm sitting there waiting in line, and a guy right in front of me, and he could tell he was an American, most likely a GI. I think he was military, which, I was former military too, but a Korean staff came up to him, and you could tell he worked for the airline. He was in uniform, had a name tag, and he asked to see that guy's ticket. And the guy's like, no, I got a ticket. And he was just really rude, saying, I'm in line. Yeah, of course I got a ticket for this flight. And just really rude to the guy. And the Korean backed up and was like, okay. He came to me. I was in line. He said, do you have a ticket for this flight? I was like, yeah. He goes, can I see it? And I was like, sure. I mean, he was official. And he looked at my ticket. Come with me, upgrade.
Yeah.
And he took me out of the long line, took me up front, checked me in. And I was sitting in business class with a free drink as that jerk walked past me to go to the back of the plane. And this was Korea to the United States, which business class a hell of a lot nicer on those really long flights. But that just shows the difference of, people being rude, and just be polite can make a big difference sometimes.
And just being chill. And again, it gets back to that preparation you were talking about earlier, where back in the day, we'd read The Lonely Planet and study the phrase book in the back. And nowadays you can get on the forums, you can get on the travel pages, pop up Duolingo and just pass the first class. So you can say, hello, good morning, where's the bathroom? Those things. And just that little effort, because I think a lot of the world expects people who will look and seem American. They expect us to be rude. They expect us to be presumptuous. Unfortunately, I think the ugly American is a trope and a stereotype for a reason, although it's not nearly as universal as I think some folks have been led to believe. But when they see an American walk into a shop, come up to the counter, I think a lot of them are like, oh, shit, is this gonna? And then when you immediately allay that fear by saying hello in their language and just smiling and not doing the hello, where is the bus station? It's immediately, you can see the change in their attitude and their vibe.
I agree. And that is so important. Just making that effort and just being polite and courteous, and not that I'm better than you. That makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, just the assumption that I kind of walk into most of those assumptions with, I'm a reasonably competent person. I wrote a book full of advice for people, for grown adults. But in this scenario, in this country, I'm the idiot. So, walking into, and that's true of most of us, walking into that with that assumption and the gratefulness that, hey, you're going to help this idiot, right?
Dixon said, haha, they have pocket translators nowadays. Yep.
They do. Like last year in Crete, we used Google Translate on our phones so much. I really kind of wanted to finally successfully learn a language by spending a year in Greece, but everybody in Crete speaks English. Some of them better than I do. And we had Google Translate. So I completely failed in that goal because I didn't have that much practice. But again, kalimera, kalispera, like hello, good afternoon. Efharisto, thank you. Just that little bit, made a huge difference.
Yeah. One of the more humbling experiences I ever had traveling was in Vietnam. Mm. When a college-age Vietnamese gentleman took me out for coffee. Mm. And at the time, I was living in Japan, making good money. And he was when he asked if I went to movies, I said, not as much in Japan. They're more expensive. We watch videotapes. You know, my buddies and I, we rent videotapes. This is back in the 90s. VHS was still the medium. And he's like, well, how much is a movie? And at the time in Japan, it was equivalent to around $18 to $20, depending on the movie theater, for a movie ticket. And he's like, my 1 month salary would not pay for that. Yeah. He made less than $20 a month working where he was working, but he would not let me pay for the coffee because he wanted to go out to coffee with me to practice his English.
Yeah.
What's a humbling experience like that maybe you've experienced in a different country?
Oh, you know, the big one for me was when I was living in Japan. I was there from 2000 to 2002. So we just missed each other probably. Was the being illiterate. You know, I was spent a year, and I'm one of those people I've always read. I don't remember learning to read. I think a lot of folks are like that, right? And then all of a sudden, I was functionally illiterate for a year. I had to ask people in the first months which restroom that was before I kind of figured that out. And that was immensely humbling to have to rely on so many people for very basic life skills. And sometimes buying what I thought was this thing at the grocery store and coming home and having to eat something entirely different for dinner that night. But yeah, it was life-changing for me. When I came home, I volunteered with some literacy organizations. And it also, as a high-speed, low-drag American man, it was where I learned how to ask people for help.
Awesome. Yep. Yeah, I was in Japan, lived there in the 90s, and I learned about 200 kanji, which still you're nowhere near literate, but I could tell the difference of a men's room and a ladies' room. I could tell the difference between beef and pork and horse, different kind of meats at the supermarket with the I knew those kanji, but yes, it is definitely very different when you cannot read things.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough that because they have the 3 alphabets there, the kanji, the hiragana, and the katakana. The person who gave me some tutoring in Japanese in the months before I went, he said, you know, usually they teach you hiragana first, but I'm going to teach you katakana first because the menus are in katakana. So I can at least read half of a menu.
Yep, I learned the katakana, hiragana because those are phonetic. Those are pretty easy. But I had about 200 kanji that I knew.
That's impressive.
Which you need a couple thousand though to be literate.
Yeah. All I got by the end of my stay there, the only kanji I'd really memorized were the kanji for the cities on the bus and train route back to where I lived.
Where you lived, yep. And you had to know those.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, it is what we're kind of circling around again is it's so important, it's so growing to get out there and spend some time. And it's something we should all, if we at all give our kids, it's safe and easy to give that to our kids. And that's just one aspect of safety.
Yep. And that's awesome. And like I said, we share that. And your kids are a little bit younger still. You know, my daughter now in college, she took that wanting to travel and see elsewhere bug that we gave her when she was young by taking her over to Korea for longer times because, you know, we had family there, going to other countries. Now, like I said, she's doing her semester abroad over there, but she's traveling weekends to Japan. I think in a couple of weeks, she's going to take a long weekend to Hong Kong. And then she said there was a long weekend in June. She had a friend, they wanted to go to the Philippines. So she's just really taking advantage of everything. And then when the semester's over, she's going to Singapore to do an internship before she comes back to America. So she's taking advantage of that. And I'm sure your kids will be the same when they get up in those ages.
It's funny. My oldest is 25. He likes to travel for brief stints, but he gets homesick easily. But the thing that you just mentioned about your daughter's experience is another aspect of going abroad for a bit, especially for a more extended time. In America, we are a long way from almost everywhere. Where in most other parts of the world, you make home base somewhere, you can visit 9, 10, 11 countries in a couple of months' time because it's like traveling to other states here.
Exactly. And that's why she said she goes, the most expensive part is getting to Korea. Once she's in Korea, hopping over to all these different places, much more affordable.
Yeah. Did she take the from Korea to Japan? Did she take that little ferry off of what is that, Busan?
No, I believe they took a quick flight.
Okay. But yeah, it's a puddle jumper from Seoul to Narita.
Yep. So so she's having a blast, and she's been to, when she was in Korea last summer, she hopped over to Japan. So this isn't her first time to experience Japan, and she's just loving hopping around as she spends time over there.
Yeah, and that's something that we can give them. One of the golden rules in the book is live by example. Things like, if our kids might not always listen to us, but they're always watching. And that's everything from putting in your seatbelt and not texting and driving when you're in the car with them. I have an issue with that, with texting and driving. And so the deal I have with my kids is if they catch me texting and driving or interacting with anything but the GPS on my phone, they get to pick the music for the rest of the ride. But that kind of living by example, but also living your values, whether that's you want travel and international experience for your kids, whether you want them to come home from school or see you after dinner reading every night, or just the way that you argue with your partner, with their parent, all of those ways of living by example in front of your kids so they can see. And that's where you did that with your daughter, taking her abroad. And now when she had the opportunity to do a semester abroad, she's jumped in with both feet in a wild yahoo.
Yep, that's great. We're coming up on a half an hour, but I always like to ask people, and we've done a lot of travel stuff, so let's stay away from travel, but I like to ask you something that you enjoy doing and a way that you make sure that it's safe when you're doing it. Now, I had somebody, Phil was on here a month or so ago, and he liked going out catching poisonous snakes and different big snakes and different things, but he had a safe way to do it. So what is something you enjoy doing and a way that you make sure that you're safe when you're doing it?
So I'm an enormous nerd. I still play Dungeons and Dragons once a week as a man in his 50s. I love tabletop role-playing games. And, it's pretty easy to stay safe with that because you're spending time indoors with your friends. But I also will game online, and I go to a lot of conferences and conventions, and then I'll be gaming with strangers. And one of the things that I do there is I just, you take a look at the people and you just kind of make eye contact and do a little scan, check their body language. Very nice, but there's a predator in every crowd. And sometimes those predators are actual, they might try to get you away and mug you or scam you. But a lot of the time, they're just kind of social parasite type predators where they're going to want to take a lot out of you. But either way, just making eye contact, setting boundaries, using test questions, little things like, hey, I have a hard out at 9, even though you don't, just to see how they respond to that boundary you have set. Scooching your chair a little further away and seeing if they follow you or if they respect that distance. Those are ways in any social situation, and this is dating advice I give to anybody who asks me about dating advice for their daughter, just setting some arbitrary boundary and see how they respond to having that boundary set. Because if they don't respect that boundary, then that's kind of a, what do they say now, a red flag about whether or not you want to pursue a relationship or allow that person to be alone with you.
That is great advice. And yes, those boundary setting is such an important concept when it comes to safety, self-defense. And if people don't respect those boundaries, it's time to do something.
Yeah. Now, in the tabletop role-playing game community, there's the autism spectrum is more broadly represented than in the rest of the world. And so sometimes you have to be very clear because picking up on subtle social cues isn't as easy for people in that population. However, when a rule is explained to them very clearly, people on the spectrum are usually far more likely to respect that rule than folks who aren't. So you can still navigate that, but maybe navigating it is a little different than at, say, a football game.
Great. That's some awesome advice, Jason. I really appreciate you being on here. Want to remind people to go to enjoylifesafely.com. Make sure you sign up for that newsletter. And Jason, where can they get a hold of you, get a hold of your books, other information?
Sure thing. safestfamilyontheblock.org is the website. We're revamping it right now, so pardon the construction mess. You can find the show on YouTube. Just look for Safest Family on the Block there. You can look for Alan specifically. And then you can find me on Facebook. There's, I think, 5 or 6 Jason Bricks on Facebook. I'm the only one who routinely talks about family safety, heavy metal, and tabletop role-playing games on the same day.
And the book, show it one more time. Make sure people got avenues to get that.
Safest Family on the Block. You can find it at YMAA Publishing. You can find it at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And I really recommend, if you want to choose, bookshop.org. I'm not some representative of them, but the concept of the convenience of Amazon while still supporting local bookstores is a mission close to my heart. So if you're not sure where you want to pick it up, go ahead and pick it up at bookshop.org.
And a number of YMAA books are in Barnes & Noble. So if you happen to be in Barnes & Noble, browsing the shelves, and you see Jason's book, pick it up, take a picture of it, post it on social media, and purchase it. Go home and learn something.
Yes, please. And if you don't see it, go ask them for it. You don't even have to buy it. If you just go ask for it, it goes in their records and algorithms.
Yep. Great. Well, thank you so much for being on, Jason. It's been a pleasure. You've been on before, and I hope to have you on again. And I want that book to sell tons because it will help people enjoy life safely.
Well, thank you, Alan, very much. And Alan's got a little blurb in the front about how much he enjoyed it. So if you like Alan, you'll like the book.
Everybody go out, make it a safe and fantastic Friday. I'll be back tomorrow to talk about a couple different books.
Outstanding.